Greetings, Alpha Class. Today I'm just going to give a brief current event uh, conversation, which we're going to talk about the whole black experience and black therefore of the fact that we still fighting over colors of our skin. Um, Let me just go back to what I was talking about yesterday in terms of um, you see these faces. They've all made changes for us as people, and yet and still all these changes in which we've made, we're still dealing with racism. Let me talk to the people who don't really understand that this goes beyond the black and white. This is a class thing. First and foremost, we'll go back into the histories of saying, where did all this stuff become from? If you search their history, the European history, the histories of the Irish versus the Scottish, and the English against the Irish and the Scottish, they were fighting with each other before they were even fighting with us. But with this being said, they had developed some years ago, we'll say in the Middle Ages, that they developed this caste system where in their mind, the only people who were supposed to be educated were supposed to be the barons, the lords, the nobles, the kings, and the queens, and the prince and the princesses. If you weren't of nobility, then your skill set was if you were a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, blacksmith, those things. You pretty much worked for the kings and queens and the lords and the nobles. Education was not on the top of the charts for you as a lower class person. That's before they even touched coming over continents and coming over into the Americas as they renamed it, and where they taken some of my ancestors and made them change their names from, Geronimo and Runs with Wolves and Spirit of Air and Wild Horse, Crazy Horse, to John Smith, and these names in which were given to them by their new detainers and the ones who they showed kindness to before eventually being pushed into reservations. But saying that is to say that they did that with the Native Indians, my ancestors that are Native Indians. Then they turned around and they did it with the people melanated from Africa. And the result was still the same. They never wanted you to know how to read their language, which is a broken dialect, a backwards form of the proper English in which they got from the British. That sound when you think about the logic and why they didn't want our ancestors to know how to read. Because if you take, for example, a boy or a girl away from their parents and you take them at a level where they're still impressionable because they don't know certain things that they would have to be taught by their parents, such as language, such as their race, such as their culture. And you take them from that and you give them this backwards culture minus the ability to read or write in that said language, then the person that has the advantage is the person who knows how to read and write. So I understand what they did in terms of how they kept us stupid for a while, be it our Native Indian, be it our Nubian brothers and sisters. I understood that. I even understood the punishment in which was brought to our ancestors had we got caught reading. I understand that. I also understand that they did it to their own people first, and they had them in lower classes. And for anybody who seen 12 Years a Slave, not the new one just came out, but the one that was out several years ago, it's been at least, 92? It's been over 20 something years. I watched it in Black History class, Mr. Taylor's class, Elizabeth High School, and the version I seen was with Avery Brooks, you know, and I was always into stuff like that. And when I watched it, aside from the uh, the dialogue that was obvious, there was dialogue that happened in that movie that wasn't obvious, which again reiterates what I was saying about the whole not wanting you to know how to read. Solomon Northup, when the version that I seen, he was educated. He was a free man. He got brought into servitude again because somebody of a frivolous person, shall I say, a moralist person, sold him back into slavery. But that part, yeah, we got that part. The part that I'm detailing on that may have not been obvious to the average person was when Solomon went back and the first master he was around, there was so many slaves he had on the plantation, this master, that he didn't even see his slaves. He just had them. And there was so many underlings and what's the word I'm looking for? Overseers that was watching the slaves. It wasn't until he lost some of those slaves that you start to see the dynamics between the rich master versus the poor master. And so Solomon goes from being in this area where he's on a plantation where they got treated a little bit more better because of the fact that the previous master was a little bit more prominent in wealth. Now, when he goes to the second master he goes to is what we call what's the word I want to say correctly? He wasn't so educated. Solomon had more education than he did. And with that being said, his slaves were stupid because he was stupid. Where the first master, played by Lauren Green, they may have been in servitude, but because the people that was in that circle were a little bit more intelligent, the chances of them learning things that the second master, slave owner, slaves were around, they were around two different environments. It's like if all you grew up around was women gossiping bad about men versus you being around women who said good things about men. If you only experienced one or the other, you'd be at a disadvantage for not knowing one or the other. But if you know both of them, then you can decipher and discern, as Solomon, wisdom and discernment, you would be able to make a better guess, or you would be more logical in your thinking when you realize that there's more than one way to see something. Not going too deep into that, my point being this. When he went to the second slave master, the slave master didn't have an education. He was one of those ain'ts and can'ts and won'ts and don'ts and anything that was out of a dictionary that was higher than the basic language in which he needed to know how to translate to people. He didn't have no vernacular, in other words. He wasn't able to use a whole bunch of words where Solomon would say things to appease to him mentally, saying to him, hey, I'm not a slave. I got stolen out of this situation. And his words were so versed and so informative that the person who didn't know, which was the slave owner, and secondly the slaves, they was like, what are these words that you using? Because they were surprised, because no one talks like that except for these higher ups, these people who were born into wealth, because that was a class system in which only the people who had money were allowed to have the type of education where they would have a vernacular. Having said all this, I speed us up to where we are right now. And what we're dealing with right now is these people right here, they were educated. Whether it was miseducation to a degree or not, They were educated. They got brought to a point in their life where knowledge was power and it was beneficial to their survival. Had they not had the knowledge that they had for them to make the next transition, we would still be in slavery. So we can go here and talk about these people and we can talk about our people, but we need to understand where this curse came from. This curse thing was not a black thing against a white thing only. This curse thing was a have against the have-nots. And if you look at how many people have come in power to wealth in the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, you start to understand or overstand that this is no longer a black and white conversation. This is a conversation of classes. And the people who want y'all to keep fighting are the people who want to make sure that the wealth class, upper, top, is way, way far removed from the lower class, which just transcends all the way far to the bottom. Saying all this, I get back to my original point of I give my energy and will to those who are looking to change this whole black versus white dynamic. When you realize that it's really not about black and white, it's more about the class systems in which they put most of y'all into boxes and even categorize me. I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing. The only reason that they haven't come and tried to convince me in any shape, form, or fashion is because I've been in the shadows. And be it fame, be it fortune, those are the tricks in which they'll use to try to bring me into their world. I don't want to be part of that world. I want to be part of the world to where we stop looking at each other's skin, we stop looking at each other's sex, we stop looking at each other's race, we stop looking at each other's sexuality, and just be regular people. I mean, I could name 80% of the people who I went to pre-kindergarten with. And I don't talk to you because you this color. I don't talk to you because a girl. I played with anybody who had that energy about them or that aura about them that let me know that they were a good energy. Good, bad, or indifferent. That's how I feel about me dealing with people from the time that I can remember and having interaction. I remember so much. I remember so much from the age of 3. The point of me saying that is to say that I can recollect and remember that no one was calling me anything outside of myself. Nobody was saying ilk or anything like that in pre-kindergarten. It wasn't until I got into first grade that I recognized that there were people who didn't want to associate with me because I wasn't rich. There was people who didn't want to associate me because their family members may have told them don't talk to the black people. And I started to realize this. I went over one of my friend's house when I was about in second grade, and he was Albanian. And we would go over his house, which wasn't too far from the school we used to go to. I used to stay after school and hang out, miss the bus so I could hang out with him and his brother. And me and my brother would hang out with him. And the mother pretty much told him, yeah, you can play with them, but don't let your father catch you. Because the father was strict, and I guess Albanians were told not to deal with the black people. But the mother was a little bit more liberal, and she realized, hey, kids are kids. Why can't they play with each other? They're not going to be able to understand this dynamics that we got going on as adults. It doesn't make any sense. Saying all this, I never disliked a person or liked a person more so because they're a color. I've had people who look just like me not be with me because of the class system, the caste system, which would have been put in their mind, whether it's through their parents, whether it's through their environment, whether it's through the media. Me as a bigger person, I forgive all those people who've looked down upon me. Because I realized that although I didn't come into this world with a gold or diamond spoon in my mouth, the education in which I got from being subjected to experiencing what it's like to not have things in a world where people believe that you have to have these things in order for you to have value. I came up as one of the most wealthiest people in the world because I had the thing that money could not buy, and that's intelligence and a parent who put me on the right path by getting me to start liking to read. And here I am at 47 years of age, and I still pick up a book. And I have yet to experience doing the ebook thing because there's so many books that are in the library, or shall I say used to be in the library, because if anybody's been going to their local libraries, they've been realizing that a lot of these books that are that are informative, that have a lot of information that's viable, that's knowledgeable, that makes you knowledgeable, are being taken out of the book system. It's getting taken out of the library, and the only thing that's being left in the libraries are the fillers that don't give you any education. They just give you a whole bunch of fillers about nonsense. Every book that's in the library is not going to be translated into ebook. So what ends up happening in terms of those informations which are universal and beneficial for the free 99 fee, those books become valuable books that ends up in a few people's libraries, in which it becomes private, and the value of their books become more valuable because Barnes and Nobles and Walden Books and all these different these bookstores will not be selling them anymore, and there won't be any reprints of these books. And this is where we've gone as a society. You want to dumb people down again, and you even want to take away the knowledge that I've gotten for free 99 when I was a youth. You want to take those things away, and I understand your plight. Your plight is to keep people stupid, because as long as you got people stupid, you're going to have people fighting over stupid things like colors of skin and sexuality and races, and you live on this side of tracks and that side of tracks. I remember from the very, very humble beginnings that I started out living in a city that I was not born in, and even within that city, you had the separations. You had this side of tracks versus that side of tracks. You had downtown versus midtown versus uptown. You had all these things. And then you had this county versus that county. Then I went to another state, and I found out they had the same type of scenario, except for it was north side versus south side, east side versus west side. And I realized, wow, this is part of that whole divide and conquer scenario in which they set up years ago to keep everybody separated and fighting with each other. If I would have kept the mentality that I've learned from being in the neighborhoods that I grew up in, I would have never went anywhere else, because I'd be institutionalized in the city in which I was born in, because to go outside of my city would be for me to go outside of a border in which I've made myself comfortable with, because I accepted that this is the best place for me to be. I've been over to go to several states, and I've seen how they regulate the different gangs. I see how it's not always red versus blue. It might be red versus red or blue versus blue. It might be gold versus gold. It may be domestic versus foreign. And it's different gangs that we have here in our United States. And not to disinclude or not to exclude the fact that we got the red gang known as the fire department and the blue gang known as the police department. And they're gangs. They're just written down in paper. And they're what we consider to be legal gangs. But they're still gangs. Come on, those of us who've seen, uh, what was that? Kings, not the Kings in New York. The movie Albany versus Manhattan, where they were sitting there telling you about the two rivaling families, and eventually one of them ends up getting into the police department, right? I've even experienced seeing those people who were head busters one day, and then they become political, and now they sit behind a desk, and they're no longer busting people in the head, and now they're making sure their children go to the best schools, and make sure they graduated out of the best colleges, and make sure that their child becomes a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, lawyer, instead of being a person who's doing what the grandfather and the father has done. There was a conversation being held not too long ago about the North and South fight. Let me just bring some other light to the whole fact of what happened with the North and South, according to my understanding. Now, according to my understanding, the North did not like the fact that the South, for the most part, that was knee deep in slavery, had so many people in servitude, slaves, that the place that didn't have the most slaves, which was the North, they wanted to have the same workforce that the Southerners had, but they didn't want to pay the Southerners for the fact that they would have to compensate the Southerners for these slaves in which they would be getting from them, because the South did have more slaves. They had plantations. The North didn't have as many plantations as the South did. So those who realize, well, we can get them for free, is if we tell them, you need to fight for your freedom. And so those people who were slaves that fought on the North, they were fighting for their freedom. And those that were in the South, they was fighting because they didn't know what type of dangers they were going to be facing had they went to this North, this unseen master that's now telling them, yeah, you can have freedom. Come with me. But the end ball result of what happened between the North and the South in terms of the result of that war was, yeah, you had black people free. They were free to go north, south, east, and west. But they were free to go more so north, where they had the textile mills and all the hard labor, and you can lose a finger, lose an eye, lose your life jobs was up in the North. And kids were dying. White kids were dying. So they had to devise the plan to where they said, let's stop having these white kids who are impressionable work for these textile mills, these robber barons, and instead, why don't we get the niggas in there? Because they're only 2 or 3/5 of a human being. We can talk to them any kind of way that we want to, because they're less than human according to our belief system. So why don't we help them so we can help ourselves? We'll bring them to the North, and we'll have a new workforce, a new labor force. And this is what happened in some aspects with the North and South. It's not the only reason why there was a North and South war, but it was very lucrative for the people in the North that now had this new labor force that they didn't have to pay for. So, with me saying all this, we go back to the fact that this man right here, he was taught in the beginning that he was miseducated by someone who educated him, but made him a nationalist, to where, again, he went from seeing everything as being a white version to a only black version, to going over to Mecca and realizing that it's not about the color of your skin. It's, as far as he had gotten to the point of realizing that we're in battling in terms of religiously. he went and found out that if you are a Muslim brother of his, if you uh, if you make wudu and you 5 times and you know and you whew, you make salat, you make prayer, and you uh, um, if you're able to, you make Hajj. Doesn't matter what color of skin you are. It matters that you do these things and you do it under Allah. That's what he found out. But then, where's Malcolm? There, Martin. There we go, Martin. They pretty much found out the same thing, but he found it from a Christian perspective. He found it from a Muslim perspective. Both of them, as you see, end up being assassinated because the powers that be did not want him to be preaching that white people can be Muslim, and the white people who assassinated him, or the powers that be that assassinated him, didn't want, again, the same scenario with Martin getting all the blacks and the whites together and kumbaya and we shaking hands and we loving each other, because it would be destructive to what they were trying to do, which was divide all of us and separate us. This thing that's going on right now, this divide and conquer, and what we're dealing with right now, it's because we're at a place in our existence to where we're about to go to a 5G, which double-edged razor. It has its beneficial, it has its benefits, but it also has its pros and cons. It has its pros and cons. I'll say it like that. And because we're there, eventually we're going to get away from depending on electricity, gas powered vehicles, oil. We're going to get away from all that. And the person who's going to benefit from all of that being gone is going to be the people who develop the technologies in which we no longer need them and is successful in putting these things out for the communities so we can bring ourselves up. And so my conversation, my thought wave, and my understanding is it's time for us to go to the next level. The way for us to get to that next level, don't take my word for it, logically deduct and see if it makes any sense, is for those of us that have a mind that think outside of the box, because we have not been conditioned to accept those things that have been handed to us for the past 50, 60 generations. Bring this into focus to where you realize who you are. And then bring that to the table to where we find out where we are. And then we'll be able to have the type of conversations that is not going to be about colors of skins or black and whites or this side of the track and that side of the tracks. Having said all that, peace, wisdom, understanding.